The bracelet, the blame, and the watchful eyes. "Ma'am, step away from the display." The officer's voice was sharp, loud enough to silence the entire store. Every customer turned. Every eye locked on her. And Linda Hartley froze. Mid-sentence, mid-breath, mid-life. A single blue sapphire bracelet glimmered under the glass counter, no longer on display, but now clutched tightly in the officer's latex-gloved hand. "That's not yours," he growled. Linda blinked, confused. I know. I never said it was. But it didn't matter. Because by now, the entire jewelry store had already drawn its verdict. And the woman in the modest cardigan had been judged guilty. What no one in that store knew, what Officer Darren Simmons didn't realize, was that among the silent observers was someone else watching very, very closely. A tall man, appearing to casually browse the luxury watch section, adjusting his sunglasses as he leaned against the glass with folded arms. He wasn't just another customer. He was Chief Richard Hartley, police chief of District 12, and more importantly, Linda's husband. He had been following Officer Simmons for weeks. And now he had just watched that officer lay a trap. 12 hours earlier, that morning, the sun had barely crested the tops of the downtown buildings when Linda tightened her ponytail and slipped into her old but freshly ironed blouse. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman in her early 40s, calm eyes, steady hands, and a warm smile that had taught hundreds of children how to read, count, and believe in themselves. Today, she wasn't a teacher. Today, she was a friend. And she was on a mission. To buy a farewell gift for Miss Delaney, her retiring colleague of 26 years. "You sure you don't want me to go with you?" Richard had asked that morning, glancing up from his desk covered in crime reports and case files. Linda chuckled. "Honey, I'm buying a bracelet, not a black market diamond ring. I think I'll survive." Still, Richard had frowned, a finger tapping a file labeled Murray's Fine Jewelry, Complaints and Incident Logs. 8 complaints in the past 4 months. 7 mysterious thefts. And every single one had been solved by the same responding officer, Officer Simmons. "Just stay alert," Richard said, slipping his badge into the drawer and reaching for his undercover sunglasses. "You might see me around, but don't let on if you do." Linda raised an eyebrow. "Wait, you're going undercover to a jewelry store?" He smiled dryly. "There's a pattern. The store owner, Harold Murray, and Officer Simmons. I think they're staging crimes, but I need proof." Linda shook her head with a grin. "My husband, the cop in a cardigan. And my wife, the teacher with a black belt in intuition," he replied. "Just be careful." Murray's Fine Jewelry looked exactly like its reputation. Polished, pretentious, and paranoid. Everything sparkled. The chandeliers, the diamonds, even the smiles of the staff looked rehearsed. Linda stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the cool interior. A violin track played softly in the background. The man at the front, Harold Murray himself, wore a 3-piece navy suit and a practiced smirk. "Can I help you?" he asked, eyes glancing her up and down. "I'm looking for a sapphire bracelet. It's for a dear friend's retirement." Her voice was pleasant but firm. Linda wasn't one to shrink under snobbery. Murray led her to a case lined with velvets and gems. He opened it with a small silver key and pulled out a delicate bracelet, blue sapphires inlaid in sterling silver. "This piece is more modest," he offered, tone dripping with judgment. Linda ignored the subtext. "Actually, that one's perfect. What's the price?" $2,950. "Just under budget." She nodded. "Can I hold it?" He passed it over, and she gently looped it around her wrist. It was simple, elegant. Ms. Delaney would love it. As she admired it, Linda noticed a tall officer step inside the store. Stern jaw, buzz-cut hair, mirrored sunglasses. He nodded to Murray with casual familiarity. "That's Simmons," she thought. The name Richard had warned her about. Something in her stomach twisted. She unfastened the bracelet and carefully handed it back to Murray. "Yes, I'll take it." As the manager rang up the bracelet, Linda stood at the counter organizing her receipt and gift box. A few feet away, Officer Simmons leaned against a wall, pretending to scan the room. But his eyes stayed fixed on her. It was subtle, but Linda had spent 2 decades watching children lie about homework. She knew when someone was waiting for something. She grabbed her bag and turned to leave. "Excuse me, ma'am." Simmons stepped in front of her. "We've had recent thefts. I need to search your purse." She blinked. "Excuse me. It's protocol." There was no smile, no explanation, just pressure. Linda hesitated, heart racing, but opened her bag. Simmons reached in, then slowly, almost theatrically, pulled out a shimmering bracelet. Not the one she bought, but the $10,000 one from earlier. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for attempted theft." The room spun. Linda staggered back. "What? That's not. I gave that back." Murray stepped forward with a dramatic sigh. I knew she was suspicious. Gasps, whispers, cell phones recording. Customers who smiled at her minutes ago now took a step back, clutching their own handbags tighter. "Turn around," Simmons said. "This is a mistake. Turn around." And in the reflection of a glass display case, Linda caught it. A man in a black vest and sunglasses, pretending to admire a Rolex, but standing perfectly still. Richard. He saw it all. Meanwhile, Richard didn't blink, didn't move. He needed to follow procedure. His undercover bodycam had caught the entire interaction, but that wasn't enough. He needed to confirm one more thing. He had seen it just before Simmons stepped in. Murray, while taking the bracelet back, had subtly palmed another one, the expensive piece, and slipped it into Linda's purse during a moment of distraction. Like a magician. Only this wasn't a magic show. It was a crime. And they had done this before. Back at the station, Linda sat in the back of the patrol car, hands clenched, tears stinging at the corners of her eyes, but none falling. She wasn't going to cry. She was innocent. She had to believe this nightmare would unravel itself. Simmons sat in the front, humming casually, as if framing people were just another part of his day. "People like you always think you're too good to get caught," he muttered. Linda looked up. "What do you mean, people like me?" But he didn't answer. He just turned the music up. Back in the jewelry store, Richard Hartley walked straight into the office, flashing his badge at a stunned employee. He pulled up the official security footage. As expected, it malfunctioned, just as Murray handed Linda the bracelet. But Richard's own hidden cameras, planted hours earlier behind the mirrored pillars, told the real story. He copied the footage onto a secure tablet and made a call. "Activate protocol. Suspect is Officer Simmons. Confirm accomplice Harold Murray. Wife was target." "Yes, my wife." He paused, his voice cold, focused. "No arrests yet. Let them think they've won. For now." Truth in the shadows. The silence inside the police interrogation room was the loudest thing Linda had ever heard. A humming fluorescent light flickered above her. The air was stale. The chair was hard. And the shame of being here, when she had done nothing, wrapped around her like a heavy coat she couldn't take off. Her hands trembled slightly, even though they were free. She kept repeating one thought in her mind like a prayer. Richard saw. He was there. He knows I didn't do this. But where was he now? She hadn't been allowed a phone call. No lawyer. No explanation. Just an empty room and the cold eyes of Officer Simmons, who had left her here like a piece of forgotten trash. 2 hours earlier, booking room. Officer Simmons had taken his time at the front desk. He joked with the clerk, laughed while signing paperwork, pretended he was the hero of the day for catching a shoplifter in pearls. Linda had watched in horror as her name was typed into the system under theft. Her voice had gone dry trying to explain. "I returned that bracelet. Ask the manager. Ask the cameras. Please. But no one listened. No one cared. Because when a police officer says something, who questions him? Somewhere across town. Surveillance van. Chief Richard Hartley sat in a black surveillance van outside Murray's jewelry store. He had changed into his uniform. The act was over. With him were two internal affairs agents, both reviewing the footage from Richard's hidden bodycams. The footage was crystal clear. Harold Murray, while pretending to fasten the first bracelet, carefully slipped a different one into Linda's purse. Then, he nodded. A short, subtle nod toward Simmons, who was already watching. It was a setup, one agent muttered. Richard didn't say a word. His jaw was clenched. Because this wasn't just about justice anymore. They had used his wife as bait. And now, he was going to tear their little scheme apart. Back at the station, interrogation room. The door finally opened with a soft click. Linda sat up straighter, her eyes hopeful, only to see Detective Karen Willis, not Richard. She was mid-40s, sharp eyes, but not unkind. Her folder was thick. Mrs. Hartley, she began gently, I'm sorry for the delay. Am I under arrest? Linda asked quickly. Willis hesitated. Not anymore. Linda blinked. What? You were never formally charged. Officer Simmons made a verbal accusation, but before booking could be completed, new evidence came forward. She opened the folder and laid out still photos from video footage. One frame showed Murray palming the bracelet. Another showed it halfway inside Linda's open purse. A third showed Simmons moving just seconds later. Linda's hands flew to her mouth. Oh my God, it really was a setup. Yes, Willis said. And not the first. Chief Hartley suspected this months ago. But we needed undeniable proof. Today gave us that. Linda leaned back in her chair, the relief so overwhelming it made her dizzy. But then came a new thought. Wait, you said not the first. Willis nodded grimly. You're the 8th victim, Mrs. Hartley. But the first one who fought back. 3 months earlier. Quiet victims. Richard's suspicions hadn't started with Linda. They had started with a college student, Maria Rodas, who had claimed she was falsely accused of pocketing a $6,000 necklace. She was arrested on the spot, same as Linda. Simmons was the responding officer. Murray was the manager on duty. Security footage had a glitch. The insurance company paid out. The necklace mysteriously reappeared a week later. And then it happened again. And again. 7 times in 4 months. All the victims had something in common. They were average people. They looked out of place in a luxury store. And none of them had the power or money to fight the system. Until today. Because this time, they framed a woman who had both the courage to speak and the husband to prove it. Murray's fine jewelry. Closing time. Harold Murray was sipping scotch in his private office. The store was closed. He felt victorious. Another day, another claim, he whispered smugly. He had already filed the insurance report. The theft by Linda Hartley would bring him $12,000 in a few days. Suddenly, the door burst open. 3 uniformed officers entered. Behind them, Chief Hartley. Mr. Murray, Richard said calmly, you're under arrest for insurance fraud, criminal conspiracy, and evidence tampering. The color drained from Murray's face. Wait, what? You can't. Richard held up the tablet with the video. You picked the wrong woman to frame. Handcuffs clicked. Meanwhile, Simmons' downfall. Officer Simmons was already back at the station, trying to laugh off questions from his colleagues. Lady tried to walk out with a sapphire bracelet. You should have seen her face. But the laughter stopped when Captain Yates entered the room with 2 IA agents and Detective Willis. Officer Simmons, she said firmly, you're being placed under arrest. Effective immediately, your badge and weapon are revoked. What the hell? Simmons stood up, jaw tight. Security footage from an undisclosed source shows you cooperating with a known conspirator to falsely accuse a civilian of theft. That civilian, Linda Hartley, is the wife of the district's chief of police. For the first time in his career, Simmons couldn't find words. We have your phone records, your text messages with Murray, and your bank deposits. Wait, you can't prove. We already have. That night, home at last. Linda and Richard sat on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea under the stars. She looked at him. You knew it might happen. You warned me. Why didn't you stop me? Richard sighed. I didn't think they'd target you. I thought you'd be invisible to them. But maybe that's exactly why they chose you. She gave him a soft smile. Because I'm average. Because you're real, he corrected. And they underestimated that. Linda nodded. And now? Now we go public, he said. We fight to clear the names of the others. Your case will open the door. She exhaled. I never wanted to be a headline. You won't be, Richard promised. But your courage will be the reason other voices are heard. 1 week later, press conference. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But Chief Hartley stood firm behind the podium. Beside him, Maria Rogas, now smiling through tears. 3 other falsely accused victims sat behind him too. And in the front row, watching quietly, was Linda. We failed them, Richard said honestly, addressing the crowd. But we've started to fix it. Thanks to one woman who refused to be silent, we're unraveling a criminal operation that used power and position to destroy lives. And we're not done yet. The crowd applauded. Linda wiped away a quiet tear. Back in the classroom. 2 days later. Miss Hartley, what's courage? A little boy asked during character class. Linda paused, then smiled. Courage, she said softly, is standing up when you're scared and telling the truth, even when no one believes you. The last betrayal. 3 weeks had passed. The headlines had faded. The press conference was over. And Linda Hartley should have been able to return to her quiet, peaceful life. But something still didn't feel right. She felt watched. Not just because people at the grocery store now whispered, "That's the woman they framed." Not because the news labeled her the teacher who took down corrupt cops. No, it was something else. A feeling deep in her chest, like someone was still pulling strings, just out of sight. And Linda, calm and composed as ever, had learned not to ignore her instincts. 1 step forward, 2 secrets back. The state attorney's office had officially charged Officer Darren Simmons and Harold Murray with multiple counts of fraud, false arrest, conspiracy, and abuse of authority. Both men were denied bail. The investigation had identified 8 confirmed victims, with 3 more potential cases under review. And thanks to video footage, no one doubted Linda's innocence anymore. The case had become a symbol of justice, of the power of truth, and of the quiet strength found in someone who refused to be broken. But behind the scenes, something deeper had begun to unravel. Late night, Richard's home office. Chief Richard Hartley sat at his desk, the room dimly lit. Stacks of documents were scattered around him. Files from old theft complaints, internal memos, even anonymous letters. But one file, marked Confidential, ISONLY, was open in front of him. He leaned forward, staring at a name that hadn't come up before. Lieutenant Alan Price, District 12 Assistant Commander. Assigned, Internal Case Review Division. Signature, approved all Simmons incident reports. Location during jewelry store sting, unaccounted. Richard rubbed his jaw. He knew Alan Price, had worked beside him for years. A straight shooter, or so he thought. So why did you approve all those cases? Richard whispered to the photo in the file. And where were you the day my wife was framed? His phone buzzed. Text from IA Agent Carla Chen. We found something. Need to meet. Urgent. Meanwhile, Linda's new normal. Back in her classroom, Linda tried her best to return to normal. 3rd graders, thankfully, didn't care much about the news. They just wanted story time, spelling tests, and someone to listen when their hamster died. But even here, the whispers followed her. Parents stared longer during pickups. The principal now smiled too widely, a little too often. And one morning, Linda found a letter in her classroom mailbox. Sometimes justice only scratches the surface. Watch your back, teacher. Anonymous. She read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in her bag. Fear didn't live in her heart anymore. Courage had taken its place. Evening. Abandoned warehouse. Aya meetup. Richard parked carefully in the shadows. Agent Chen was already there. She handed him a flash drive. Security footage from the day of the jewelry incident. Not from the store, from across the street. City traffic cam caught something. He plugged it into his tablet. The grainy footage played. He saw Simmons escorting Linda from the store. Then, a figure stepped out of a nearby black sit-in. Tall, in uniform, but not close enough to be seen clearly. Chen zoomed in. Badge number barely visible, 3281. Lieutenant Alan Price. Why would the assistant commander be nearby? Richard muttered. Because maybe, Chen said carefully, he was the one protecting the scam from the top. The final thread. The deeper Richard dug, the more tangled things became. Lieutenant Price had signed off on every single report Simmons had filed, silenced 2 whistleblower complaints from junior officers, approved bonuses for Harold Murray's business under a community partnership fund, and worst of all, he'd received 3 unexplained wire transfers from a private bank in the Caymans, the same week each insurance payout had cleared. He wasn't just aware. He was the puppet master. And Simmons was only a pawn. Linda's choice. At home, Linda listened carefully as Richard laid out what he had found. Alan Price has been protecting this scheme from above, Richard explained. Simmons and Murray were just tools. But Price, he's the one who kept it alive. Linda frowned. Then why isn't he arrested yet? Not enough direct evidence, Richard said, rubbing his temples. He's smart. Nothing is in his handwriting. No fingerprints. Just timing. Connections. Suspicion. Linda stood up slowly. Then let's give him a reason to reveal himself. Richard narrowed his eyes. What are you thinking? I'll give a public testimony, she said. But I won't mention him. I'll let him believe I'm going to blow the lid off everything. And then we watch what he does next. Richard stared at her for a long moment. You were never just a school teacher, he whispered. Linda smiled. And you were never just a husband. The testimony. At the courthouse, Linda sat before a packed room. TV cameras rolled. Reporters leaned forward. She told her story calmly, clearly, with strength in every word. They didn't pick me because I was suspicious. They picked me because I was ordinary, because I wouldn't fight back. But I did. She never mentioned Alan Price. But she made it clear someone higher had helped Simmons operate freely. I believe there are still people in power who protect the corrupt. But now, the truth is watching them. The trap closes. That night, Lieutenant Alan Price booked a ticket to the Caymans. He deleted emails, cleaned out a bank account, started wiping his hard drive. But it was already too late, because Agent Chen had installed surveillance on his devices, because Richard had filed a secret warrant that very morning, because Linda's speech had done exactly what they needed, made him panic. When he arrived at the airport, 3 federal agents were waiting. He didn't even make it to security. 1 month later, final closure. Linda stood outside the courthouse beside Richard. Simmons, Murray, and Price had all pled guilty to avoid public trials, but their names would be remembered for the shame they brought to the badge. The state launched a new accountability unit for internal police abuse. Linda was offered a community leadership award, which she declined. I'm not a hero, she told the mayor. I'm just a teacher who knew what was right. Final scene. The classroom again. As the afternoon sun streamed in, Linda sat cross-legged on the rug with her students. The little girl raised her hand. Miss Hartley. Did you really catch bad guys? Linda laughed gently. No, sweetie. I just told the truth. But everyone says you were brave. Linda looked around at the curious, innocent eyes staring up at her. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, she said softly. It means you do what's right, even when you're afraid. Outside the window, the world moved on. But inside that small classroom, a new kind of lesson had begun. One about justice, one about courage, and one about how ordinary people, when they choose to speak, can change everything.